What is your name, what are your pronouns, and what are you going to talk about today?
I'm Catherine Baker, my pronouns are she, her, and today I'm going to talk about being LGBTQ+ under Section 28 in the United Kingdom.
What does being LGBTQ under Section 28 mean?
Section 28 was a law in the United Kingdom which was in force in England and Wales between 1988 and 2003. It was repealed a little bit earlier in Scotland in 2000, and it prevented local authorities from doing anything which promoted homosexuality as a normal family relationship. And under local authorities, where that had most impact of all was schools. This meant that schools were not allowed to promote homosexuality as being equal to straight relationships in any way, and it intimidated many schools and many teachers from supporting students who were LGBTQ+ at all. LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer plus. There's other versions of that acronym as well, which include some other identity labels. Many people who fall under that spectrum feel that one or more of those terms expresses their identity very well indeed. Other people who fall under that spectrum feel that their identity falls between terms, or that no one term captures completely who they are, but they know that there is something about them which is not the same as being straight and being cisgender, which means not being trans. So, for some people, the term queer, which is a slur that we have reclaimed, serves as a term which captures that ambiguity and fluidity, and means that we don't have to define our identity through any one term. It's a very personal way of using the term, and I wouldn't use it for somebody else who didn't apply it to themselves. So sometimes I might talk about being queer if I didn't want to have to completely fix the boundaries of gender identity or sexual orientation. So this is one way in which you might hear somebody use the term about themselves.
Could you please give us a brief description of what being LGBTQ+ means to you personally?
What being LGBTQ+ means to me personally is that for a very long time when I was growing up, I knew there was something different about myself, but didn't have a language to express what that was. I was only able to recognise it through the kind of terms which were available to me, through mainstream education, through mainstream popular culture, and at the time when I was growing up in the 1980s and 1990s, LGBTQ+ representation was very thin on the ground. When we were represented, it was largely through stereotypes or offensive media portrayals, and very little media made by LGBTQ+ people about LGBTQ+ people was able to reach somebody like myself as a child or a teenager growing up. Usually you had to be older, you had to be better connected into LGBTQ+ subcultures. You had to know other people who were LGBTQ or be going to the right pubs and bars and clubs in order to start realising what the culture was and the ways in which you could identify yourself at the time. So none of that was accessible really to me at that time.
How did being LGBTQ affect you growing up and earlier in your life?
At the time I was growing up, I spent nearly all of my time at school at a time when Section 28 was in force and schools were not allowed to show that they supported or promoted homosexuality as the law had it. And that affected not just anyone who was gay or lesbian or bi, but anyone who might have been trans or gender non-conforming, and anyone who was expressing themselves and expressing their gender or expressing how they were attracted to in ways that did not fit the straight, cisgender, non-trans norm. What that meant for many young people growing up, including myself, is that once you started realising there were these different things about you, it was something that schools and teachers would take as a problem, never mind how other people in your school the same age as you reacted. And many people's parents didn't know what to do either. If you had supportive parents, which I'm lucky to say that I did, even they would be very worried about how their child growing up would fit into society. Would they be able to get the jobs they wanted to get? Would they be able to have the lives they wanted to have? All the time I was at school, I never knew, for instance, that it would be legal for me one day to get married if I wanted to. And while I was going through questioning all these things, schools were not allowed to give me support.
Have you felt you've been marginalised or stereotyped due to being LGBTQ+?
At the time when I was coming out as LGBTQ+ in the 1990s, most of the knowledge that most people would have had about anyone who was LGBTQ+ or queer in any way came from the stereotypes that they had been served in the media and had heard through public discourse. In my own case, I felt that when I was most stereotyped in my life was when I was growing up, particularly when I was a teenager. And for me, I've experienced less stereotyping since then, but I realised that across society, the amount of stereotyping which still does take place is extensive, and even more so, I think, these days for trans people compared to many people who are lesbian, gay or bi, but they're not trans.
Has any marginalisation or stereotyping happened at the university, or have you felt quite accepted?
I've always felt very well supported at the university, and I think I've been lucky in the teams that I've belonged to feel that way, because I realise that given the amount of people who work for us, I feel like we have fewer LGBTQ+ colleagues than we ought to do. I feel sometimes as if we're a community where many people don't feel that they can be open about themselves. And nobody should have to declare anything about their sexuality or their gender at all. But given how many of us there are, I do wonder sometimes if we could be doing more as an organisation and a community, so that everybody who does want to be open about themselves can feel fully comfortable too.
Could you do some myth busting about stereotypes surrounding being LGBTQ+?
One myth we could really bust is the idea that LGBTQ people don't really know who they are or don't really know what's happening to them. Trans people experience this more than anything these days, but it's common to anyone who's LGBTQ+, probably, that somebody has asked them, are you sure it's not just a phase? Are you sure that you'll not just grow out of it? And there are still too many people, too many organisations who don't trust the people whose sexuality or whose gender it is to have the autonomy and the knowledge to say who they are and what's really happening to them.
How could the people around you and the university do better?
Everyone LGBTQ+ has been through experiences of prejudice and discrimination and people having the worst misconceptions about them. And you carry that experience through into the rest of your life, even if you're being treated very supportively in your present time. And so something that every person and every organisation can do is to show that you are somebody who can be trusted through your actions as well as your words.
How do you feel the media represents being LGBTQ+?
Media representation of LGBTQ+ people has changed immensely over my lifetime in terms of the sheer amount of visibility, in terms of the range of identities and backgrounds that are being represented, and in terms of LGBTQ+ creators having more opportunity now to tell their stories in their terms and reach a wider public in doing so. We are seeing more representation of queer people of colour, we are seeing more representation of trans people, but this is still happening in a very unequal media system. So we can ask ourselves when we're hearing about anyone in the LGBTQ+ spectrum, are we hearing their voices or are we hearing them being spoken about? And I think the imbalance is greatest right now for how trans people are being represented in media.
Is there anything else you would like to say or anything you would like anyone to know about being LGBTQ+?
For many people who are trans or gender non-conforming, being able to communicate what their pronouns are and being able to trust that everyone will use the pronouns that are theirs is incredibly important. We need to be aware as well Some people may keep their pronouns to themselves. Some people may be open about being trans in certain situations, but not others. So what people do with their pronouns is a very individualistic decision. We need to be sensitive to that. And at the same time, we need to ensure that we are getting everyone's names and everyone's pronouns right in the ways that they tell us. And we need to make sure that we are not creating systems where the wrong name or the wrong pronoun might be revealed in a way that somebody doesn't want.